How do you think the skill sets differ to be successful with buyers versus sellers?
I believe you have to have a broader knowledge of the industry, market trends. A lot of times when you're listing property, you're dealing with someone that's already had the ownership experience. So they've gone through the process. They're more aware of what the dynamics are. And in some ways, you know, the internet's been hugely helpful to our industry. We have the highest, last year was the highest participation percentage, broker involved share of the marketplace in the history of real estate. So the internet's helped us tremendously. And I remember when we first started using the internet, people were terrified.
Yeah.
But it made our jobs much easier, much more efficient. And we can provide services better. So I believe that that has been somewhat of a double-edged sword because we get people that believe they are experts. And I've always said I never want to be an expert because by definition it means you've learned it all. I hope I've never learned it all, and I know I haven't. And so it's interesting, but you better have a better knowledge base and a broader knowledge base to successfully work with listing property.
Okay. And some of the other phases of the transaction that I haven't really gotten to a lot here, but I'd like to touch on with you because you may not call yourself an expert, but I'm going to call you an expert because you're damn close as to one as I know. The inspection process. It's a place where a lot of agents have a lot of anxiety about things falling apart.
Yes.
And it seems like there's always so much gray when everyone's looking for black and white.
Yes.
How do you manage your inspection process with your transactions?
I believe I do a pretty darn good job. And that goes back to the fact that I understand construction to an intimate level.
Yes.
So I have a huge advantage. And that's why a lot of our brokers come to me to help them with inspection responses. And I'm glad to do it. But I believe that it's really more a sense of fair play. Where it gets difficult is if you have a client or another client that they're not as clear on what fair play is. And let's face it, even if it isn't a defect, if it's a deficiency, as I would like to say, should it be corrected by the person that is in the property? Probably so. So I lean more toward, first of all, I like inspections. I believe they're an intimately necessary part of the process to protect the consumer and the homeowner.
Yeah.
And sometimes we find out things like mold contamination, lack of air quality that the homeowner needs to know anyway. But it's fairly clear now in our paperwork. Our documents are getting better and better every year, in my opinion. They're easier to use, they're easier to understand, and they're eliminating more of the gray area. So a defect, as defined in the purchase agreement, is anything that can adversely affect the health and safety of the occupant of the home, and also that would negatively impact the long-term value of the property. So anything that leaks needs to be corrected. Anything that is an environmental contaminant needs to be corrected. The gray area comes into things like windows. That's a big one. People get all upset about failed window seals. Well, it's a cosmetic issue. It's not a defect because it's not devaluing the home and it's not a safety issue. But somebody could say, well, if I don't see the burglar coming up to the house, that's a safety issue. Well, that's where the gray area comes in. And
when you talk about fair
sticky.
play, can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, let's have a moral compass through the inspection process. Let's do what's appropriate. Deferred maintenance is deferred maintenance. And that's a reality. And sometimes people say, well, I'd never had to pay this for. Well, that's because you didn't pay it before. And let's go forward. And it's on both sides, believe me. But for the most part, I look back, and I think I've shared this number with you. I would say only 1% of the time do I have a truly difficult individual on the other side of the transaction? And that includes the consumers and the brokers.
Right.
I've run into a lack of experience very often, but that's where you reach out and you help. We're all in this together, and we're in this to take care of the customer. That's the reality.
Well, talk a little bit about relationships with other brokers and
Mm-hmm.
how important that is.
Hugely important. It's been a fabric of some of my business every year, in that my son and I are also members. My son works with me. I love that. That's been a blessing.
Corey.
And yeah, Corey, and he has proven to be a phenomenal broker. He has expertise in some areas beyond me, and he really enjoys it. And he does a lot of the back end work. I do a lot of the selling, but he also is doing more of the selling at this point. But working with other brokers has been a good thing. There's a lack of knowledge because statistically, I saw an article through the National Association of Realtors last week where in 2024, 71% of licensees didn't do a single transaction. That's a large number. It doesn't mean they're bad people. It doesn't mean they're unintelligent. It just means they haven't had the exposure of enough transactions to really understand the underpinnings of how to get to the closing table and everyone be satisfied. And so I try to help them. But my point on working with them and how it can benefit the broker themselves is that if you have good relationships, I would say 2 or 3 times a year, because Corey and I are also members of the Indiana Regional Multiple Listing Service, which goes from really Fort Wayne all the way to Evansville. And we also are a member of MyBOR, and that gives us a broad geographic area. We've sold lake homes in northern Indiana, and we sell frequently several homes in Bloomington. And that has given us the opportunity where other brokers are aware of that. And they'll say, Kyle, I don't go to even the south side of Indianapolis sometimes.
Right.
And they'll say, will you take this lead for 25%? Well, absolutely, I'll do that. So 2 or 3 times a year, we get a significant piece of business and get to meet a wonderful new client simply by good broker relationships.
Yeah. Where do you think agents are failing in terms of making those relationships? Or how? Go ahead.
I do believe some of the more seasoned brokers have a tendency to be a bit dictatorial or confrontational in a transaction when they're dealing with someone that's not as experienced. They get frustrated and they start to show that frustration. That's a problem. On the other side of the coin, I think some of the newer people are afraid to ask for help.
Right.
And I try to do it as delicately as possible, but there are oftentimes I'll send back an email with a list of the items that need to be corrected and ask, would you like to send another purchase agreement, or would you like us just to counter these elements? And that has really helped Corey and I a lot to have a really smooth transaction with someone that just doesn't have the experience.
Okay. That's great.
Yeah.
It would be nice if all the other experienced agents were.
It would.
As helpful.
Yes, it certainly would. And that's one of the things to get this in here about our culture that I love. You and Chris and Brian, you don't tolerate egos. We don't have egos at High Garden Real Estate. We just don't. And I've seen people part from us because of that.
Right.
Because they just don't fit our culture.
Yeah.
And that's one thing I love about our organization, and why a new broker, gosh, if you just got your license, come to High Garden Real Estate. Do yourself and your career a favor to come to us, because you're going to be nurtured, not just helped, nurtured.
And talk a little bit about what it takes, in your opinion, for a new agent to be successful. That they need nurture.
Totally. And they absolutely have to have a support fabric of expertise. Let's face it, they're not going to have the expertise. I don't know it all. And I seek help all the time. And I don't know how many times I go to Brian in a month, probably 4 times, once a week at least, in spite of the years I've spent in this. And if someone comes into the business, that it would be essential they choose a brokerage where they truly have one-on-one individual mentorship through transactions until they have a good foundation. And in my opinion, for most new brokers, that's going to be a 2-year process.
Yeah.
It really is, till they're truly competent without help. The biggest hurdle I see most new brokers, the challenge for them is to understand that concept and be fearless about their prospecting and their real estate conversations. That's the largest hurdle that I've seen over the years I've helped people at Highgarden. They just are so reluctant to have that initial conversation because they don't have the confidence in their knowledge base. And that's why we'll even go out with them. We'll go out on that visit, and we don't ask for a share of the commission. We just go with them, and we'll help them through those initial transactions, be it a listing or a showing property or what have you.
I always say it takes about 6 to 12 months for an agent to kind of get comfortable,
Yes.
and maybe 12 to 24 months for an agent to maybe be confident.
Yes.
I mean, it's a process.
Yes.
There's a multi-skilled facets here of learning and understanding to gain that wisdom.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, sometimes that hurdle is so difficult for some people to overcome that I have to know it all before I go out there and have conversations. Well, then you're not going to make it in our industry.
Yeah.
Because the conversations come first. The knowledge will be there with your support.
Also, haven't spoken too much about the negotiation process in a transaction, but I'd like to with you.
Sure.
It's a place where it makes a big difference in your value to a client, but it's a place that I don't hear a lot of agents talk too much about.
Yes.
How do you approach negotiations, and what do you think agents could do better in that regard?
It's a lot of different things. Negotiation has so many variables. Where someone was raised, meaning there can be ethnic, there can be cultural differences that are foundational to the negotiation process. And if you don't go through those steps, you're not going to have transactions with people that feel that way. You're just not. So that's incredibly limiting in today's practice of real estate, because a lot of my clientele are expats from other countries and so forth. And if you don't understand the cultural necessities of the negotiation process, because it varies all over the world, you're not going to do well with that happening. The other process, it's very different with a home builder as it is with a resale property. Home builders are non-emotional. They don't care. They're not going to get upset by a low offer or what have you. A lot of brokers just don't understand that they can negotiate on, especially on spec homes,
Yes.
inventory. The older the inventory, the more you can negotiate. And you can get things like if they're not including the refrigerator or a washer and dryer, or they're not including a set of blinds for the household or shutters, or if the yard isn't fully sodded, you can get full sod. Things that don't require the builder to alter their construction schedule, and also having that understanding of basically, is the builder privately held or are they publicly held? If they're publicly held, they have a quarterly call to Wall Street about how many units. Units are more important than profitability. Knowing that, hey, let's go back to them at the end of the month, or let's go back to them because we're not on a clock here at the end of this quarter, and perhaps we can get a better deal. But also be fearless in offering something low that might work.
Right.
That still could come in. That's where there's incredible monetary value in negotiation, both on price and also on inspection, and also on financing. Those three pillars can be tens of thousands of dollars to a client. and an astute broker needs to be able to monetize that value. It makes a 3% commission, small change, if you will, by really understanding negotiation, how to do it, and also understanding financing and how to get the right financing for your clients and through the inspection process as well. And having those contacts with contractors. That's another
Right.
thing that I like about Highgarden. We share all of our contractors.
Yes.
A lot of brokerages don't like to do that, but we do. And so we have a comprehensive list of competitive bid opportunities where we can really save a client a lot of money.
Right. What about negotiations on resale properties where you're dealing with another agent?
I try to talk to the agent every time. To me, it's essential to develop a rapport with the other parties involved. And that doesn't mean just the agent. That means understanding who their client is from a perspective of relationships. Who are their advisors? You know, if they're young, do mom and dad need to be brought in, or both sets of grandparents need to be brought in, or parents? Conversely, with older clientele, sometimes the kids have to be involved in the negotiation. I like to understand through that broker the motivation, if I can get it from the seller. They don't have to share the information, but there's no law against asking. Who are the parties involved? Who's advising your client? And what do you think about what's most important to them in the offer? And I find that really helps. Sometimes I get information, sometimes I don't. And that's okay. That doesn't matter. But the more you know about the situation, I believe the smoother the transaction and the negotiation becomes.
How do you go about negotiating in a delicate situation where you're dealing with a resale agent that doesn't really understand the value of their own property?
Yes. I will share comps. There are times I'll just come back and say, hey, would you mind sharing the comps you're basing your pricing on? I was fortunate enough to go through a detailed appraisal class before, so I understand appraisal pretty well. And that's a whole nother topic that I would totally revamp how we appraise property. But what we're dealt, the cards we're dealt today, I would say that understanding that aspect of appraisal and valuation of property really does help my negotiations. I might share the comps that I've established and share the knowledge I have about appraisal and financing. And, you know, we may agree on a price that's above the appraised amount, often do, especially in limited inventory markets like we're seeing.
Right.
But I believe that gives you quite a bit of assistance. And that's, again, a lot of our brokers come to me for comp assistance. One of our staff today, after this meeting, I'm going to be helping Tia Stevens
Yes.
comp a property as soon as we break.